Welcome to the Gita in Action podcast. I'm Radha Priti, and I am here with a group of Seekers Live. We are reading through the Bhagavad Gita. We're just about to finish the third chapter. And we have two new seekers here live with us today that we are so happy to welcome to our Sangha, Paula and Basha. So happy to have you both. And if you want to join us live, you can email me at seekersquest108@gmail.com, and you can join our live community every Monday and Thursday. We're here at 7:30 a.m. reading through the Bhagavad Gita, talking about its relevance to our lives, and just trying to deepen our spiritual connection. So today we're just going to do one verse again. We're on this one verse a day stint right now, but they're so potent verses. And I think if we really study them and imbibe them, we'll see how relevant, how much they show up in our lives, within ourselves, within our friends, within our families. We could start to recognize these things more and hopefully get better at mastering them, right? Because that's why we're here. So we're starting today at chapter 3, text 41. And if we recall, I'll share my screen. You guys can see text 40. If we recall, text 40 was a really potent verse. Text 40 says, "The senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust. Through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him." So I just want to review this verse really quick because it's really relevant to what we're rolling into today. Again, we have the soul, and then we have the intelligence, the mind, the senses. And the senses are like our first line of defense. But if lust is situated in the senses, then we very easily we'll feel agitated, or we'll feel stimulated, or we feel tempted. That's where the temptation starts. And then when the lust grows to the mind, we have all of these desires, and we start maybe even like imagining things, or even kind of like making stories of things that are making meanings of things that aren't even necessarily real, but it is to us because our mind is so lustful, right? And then if the lust penetrates the intelligence, that's our last line of defense before it gets to this, before our soul is impacted by this, our soul is covered. And the intelligence, if the intelligence is corrupt, we start justifying this lust. We know that we shouldn't be going to the fridge at 2 a.m. for that chocolate ice cream, but we justify to ourselves, I had a hard day, I'm not feeling like myself, I'll be better tomorrow. We justify behavior that we know isn't really in line with our higher purpose, our higher selves. So this is how lust can kind of invade our fortress, and we really, and the problem with this is we're here to uncover the soul, right? We're here to claim, our true identity, to realize our true identity. And when we are full of lust, the love that we have for God, the natural propensity of the soul, it's kind of perverted into lust for material attachments around us. And we know what happens when we become too attached to this material world, right? We become bewildered, it gets taken away from us. We become angry, all of these things that is really just misplaced love for God that's transformed into lust and manifests itself in this way. So we talked about this the last class, episode 45, if you want to check it out. Today we're moving on to text 41. We're kind of continuing on this. And now Krishna is going to tell us, he's going to start telling us how we can handle this, what we can do about this lust. So text 41 says, "Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bhartas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin by regulating the senses and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self-realization." Okay, so here we are, having described the hideouts of the enemy. We talked about that, the senses, the mind, the intelligence, the hideouts of lust, and how lust manifests in each. Now Krishna is telling us how to combat it. And this verse 41 is the first step, right? So if we consider that there's a fortress and an enemy that's marching towards it, the first thing to do is to close the gates, right? And our gates are our senses. The first thing to do is to close the gates. And our gates are the grossest defense that we have is our senses, our eyes, our ears, what we take in, what our sensory inputs, what we're taking in. And to close them, right? So similarly, he's saying that the best way to deal with temptation is to not deal with temptation, right? So if someone tends to overeat, don't keep snacks around. If someone is vulnerable to alcohol, don't keep it at home. So the principle here is boundaries. Boundaries. And we talk about boundaries all the time because they're so important, even to have healthy relationships, to have healthy work-life balance, anything in our material existence, they're incredibly important, our finances, but in our spiritual life, they're incredibly important, right? So we can kind of practice boundaries in our material existence and see how, calm and peaceful and kind of at ease they can make our material lives. But they're so important in our spiritual lives so that we can really authentically connect with God and grow, evolve towards that higher self, that higher purpose. So when we talk about boundaries, we can have various degrees of boundaries, right? We can have like zero tolerance, right? And this can be useful when the indulgence that we're looking at can be deadly, like can have really severe consequences, or if just focus is really essential, like driving and texting. That's both. Driving and texting can be incredibly deadly, and focus on driving is really important. So that's like a zero tolerance boundary, right? But each of us has to kind of decide for ourselves what some of these may be in our lives. In spiritual life, one of the commitments that we make in our bhakti paths, a lot of us make, is not to drink alcohol. And I've talked about alcohol a lot on this show. I drank alcohol before coming into spiritual life, and it wasn't something that I found I had much of an issue with. However, because the consequences of overindulging in alcohol are so severe, as we've talked about, it's something that we just don't do. We just say, you know what, I'm gonna just keep that far away. I'm not even going to flirt with that. So that, if maybe I do go through a time in my life that's really difficult and I'm in a really low place, it's not the thing that I reach out to because I've abstained from it so long that it's not even in my, realm. It's not even in my mind. So we all kind of have to decide for ourselves based off of, again, the consequences and maybe even what we're specifically prone to. Again, I've talked about a sugar addiction, since I know that I'm prone to a sugar addiction, I know that that's like my comfort whenever I'm feeling down, setting up appropriate boundaries. So it's a consequence, how severe it can be, and then also our own unique makeup and the focus required in what we're doing. And then there can be some moderate tolerance, not everything we have to just say no to, or we're even able to say no to, like if we have a food addiction, we can't just say, okay, I'm going to stop eating completely. We can't be so strict. So we kind of have to learn to moderate a little bit. These boundaries are enforced, but not absolutized. And it'll vary from person to person. The other thing about boundaries can be collective or individual. They can be boundaries can be across like a whole culture or society. And then they can also be specific to yourself and your own makeup. A big example that I think of a lot, and that comes up a lot, is across different cultures, is gender boundaries. Right? These gender boundaries, I think we could all agree, the principle of gender boundaries are important. It protects faith, it protects emotions, they protect relationships, reputations. They offer freedom with purpose. Right? But if we look at the different cultures around the world that establish these boundaries, they do it differently. Right? Western cultures prioritize more like individual freedom and personal choice. They rely more on like laws, sexual harassment policies, instead of gender segregation to set boundaries. That's what we see more in this culture. More conservative cultures enforce much stricter gender boundaries and separations. Some cultures, men and women don't ever even like interact ever, or women are dressed incredibly modestly, like their entire face is covered, only their eyes are showing. very strict gender boundaries. And this prevents temptation. It's often based on religion, tradition, family honor. I remember one time in college, I was visiting Egypt and I was at a pyramid. And there was this group of girls that was like, it was younger. They were maybe in their 20s and they were dressed very conservatively, but they were laughing. And we asked our guide, like, why are they laughing? They were standing right next to us and they were kind of looking at us. It was very obvious they were laughing at us. And we're like, why are they laughing at us? And he didn't want to tell us. He didn't want to tell us. And we're like, no, seriously, why are they laughing at us? And he said, oh, they're saying that you're going to go to hell because we weren't dressed so modestly. And this is interesting, because we all can agree that this lust is a problem in our society. Again, our relationships, our spiritual relationships, and different cultures, different people have different approaches at trying to combat it. And that's what this culture did. Their way of combating it was this incredibly conservative dress, bound segregation of genders. And that's one way to do it. That's one way to do it. We know that lust doesn't exist in the subject, right? It doesn't exist in the object. It exists in the subject. We talked about that last night. The places of lust, again, Krishna told us this in the last verse, they're not in the object of lust, they're in the subject of lust. So the person who has the lust, it's in the mind, it's in the intelligence, it's in the senses. It's not in this item that they're lustful for. However, that doesn't mean that item can't be triggering. And so that's what that society has done, is identified that that's a triggering item, and I shouldn't say item, but a trigger. And so they've tried to minimize that. Cultures, again, take care of this differently. And sometimes, and we also see different like pros and cons of different ways of dealing with it. Like if this, for example, cultures take care of this. This can create problems at an individual level. Maybe it limits self-expression, connection. People maybe feel isolated. There's lots of different ways that this can maybe have some consequences, right? And in the West, we rely a lot on the individual level, right? And this relies on high standards of self-awareness, introspection, proper guidance, which many of us just don't have or can't have, And society at large doesn't have knowledge. And if society at large doesn't have knowledge and good guidance, it will eventually become corrupt. And that's the vulnerability there. So it's really interesting. It's easy also to look at other cultures and maybe place judgment on ways that they're trying to, and judgment on the externals of what we see, like maybe that's way too strict, or maybe that's not strict enough and we do that, we all do that. But what we should really try to understand is the essence of what they're trying to do, understand maybe the pros and cons, and try to apply things to our life in a way that works for us, maybe even some kind of hybrid approach. Because we can learn from everybody. And this problem of lust, it's universal. It's everywhere. It's not unique to a certain culture, a certain gender, a certain demographic. It's everywhere, and it can be destructive. We've seen that. So when we look at, like, again, the conservative cultures, we look at like dating and marriage. A lot of conservative cultures have arranged marriages. There's families very involved. There's strict gender separation. And this can be really good because they get a lot of family support, and relationships can be very stable. This can be hard for people because maybe there's limited personal choice or potential lack of compatibility, some people may feel. So there's a lot of marital stability, which is wonderful, and wonderful for spiritual life. Paula and I were just talking about it. It's so important to have kind of a stable family, to have people that are there for you, that you're supported. We kind of need that security so that we're not constantly worried about it, so that we can really connect to higher truths. And, so that the marital stability is super important. And it provides that emotional security. But the lack of personal choice may lead to people feeling frustrated or repressed. right? On the other hand, in the West, there's a lot of casual dating, full personal choice, emotional, physical freedom. It's just like the wild, wild West. The sexual revolution is a real thing, right? So that's in some ways, the freedom to choose, you can have a high emotional connection and that could be positive. But we also here have high breakup rates, emotional confusion, risk of immortality. There's higher rates of loneliness because people are feeling anxious and depressed due to relationship instability. The pressure to find the perfect partner. So we could look at different ways of doing this. And we see the same thing in the workplace, different ways that different cultures handle this in the workplace. Because again, we can all agree that it can be a problem. I know I was in the workplace for 10 years, and I definitely had some examples that were over the line. I remember when I had already had my job, I was in college, and the recruiter came to recruit other people. And I saw him at the recruiting fair, and he said, "Oh, all the recruits are going out for dinner tonight, this time." So I show up and I'm the only person, which is like incredibly uncomfortable because I'm like 20 years old. This is like a 50-year-old man who is like supposed to be, in like a leadership position. And I remember he kept like trying to buy me drinks. And it was so uncomfortable. It was so uncomfortable. But this is what happens. We're vulnerable to that because we have such freedom. And freedom is a good thing. But then there is a bigger potential for these kinds of distractions and scandals. Whereas on the other side, if things are so segregated, it could limit, especially women's career growth. It reduces collaboration. It can limit, again, self-expression. So there has to be some kind of balance in a practical hybrid situation. This is particularly what I'm sharing right now is my opinion. This is not what the Gita says, that there needs to be a balance necessarily. But the Gita is very practical, and we have to kind of balance our culture and our need for self-expression and where we are with kind of protecting ourselves, right? So the point is, back to the Gita, the point is this is universal. Specific boundaries are variable for cultures and peoples, but at the end of the day, what it all has in common is if we can't take personal responsibility for our own shortcomings or our own vulnerabilities and try to live a God-centered life, we're just going to keep having the same problems over and over and over again. At the very core of it all, this is what's required for each and every one of us. Whether you live in a society where there's higher cultural boundaries or not, we still really have to connect with our unique selves and take personal responsibility for that. I know my husband is very into politics, and he's always talking. He's disappointed in the leadership, which it's hard not to be disappointed in when we have leaders that don't have very high character. It's actually really kind of a really depressing thing in society is when our leaders just are poor character. Whatever side you're on, you could agree that if they're of poor character, it's a sad thing, right? And so we talk about some of the big issues, that there is. Immigration being a big one, right? And so there's different sides want to handle it differently. But at the core of it all, the core of all of these issues is a godless society, right? That's like the core problem. Is this godless society? We could try to solve it with all these different rules and regulations and boundaries on corporations so that they don't get too big. But the real problem is the greed, the lust, right? The me-centered mentality, the idea that if I have all of these things, I will be happy, and everybody's competing for them. Right? It's a godless society. That's the real root of the problem. And the real solution is God consciousness. God consciousness on the individual level that will penetrate to the collective level. That's how we're really going to fix our culture, our societies, our families. It's a more centered God consciousness. So when we talk about deciding boundaries, individuals, when we talk about individuals have to decide their own boundaries. Ultimately, boundaries fall to the individual. Even if it's collective, there's still going to be some boundaries that you have to decide for yourself. And individuals can be counseled also, that ideally individuals are counseled, because we have a tendency to deceive ourselves. And especially if you live in a culture where there's not a lot of collective boundaries and a lot of the responsibility falls to you, then we really have to be aware. We really have to sharpen our intelligence. We really have to get connected, because if we remember, lust hides in the mind and intelligence. So we become our own worst enemy, right? Imagining things like if we're an alcoholic, we're going to see opportunities to drink everywhere, right? Or if we are a very struggle with like a sexualized, kind of like a sexualized person, we're going to see opportunities for that everywhere. Every person is going to turn into a desire for our lust, right? And that's just how it goes. Something really beautiful in Indian culture is every woman who's married, every woman who's married, men are taught to see them as mothers, and it's a beautiful boundary, a beautiful kind of way of, and it's very respectful, because we have to do that. We can't take whatever lust exists inside of our mind and project it outside, or that's going to become our reality and we're going to drown in it. So we have to recognize the purpose of some of these boundaries. And even if maybe we don't agree with some of the stricter ones, understand what the essence is and try to apply it in our lives in a way that makes sense for us. That may be what it is for us. Understanding that this lust exists in our mind, it's an enemy, and we can't fight it alone. We can't fight it alone. And so in Bhakti philosophy, we have, if you take anything away from these podcasts, this is a really good thing to take away, that in Bhakti philosophy, we have these three pillars: Guru, Sadhu, Sastra, right? A guru is this bona fide spiritual teacher. A sadhu is the association of saintly devotees, or people that are, again, trying to upgrade their lives, trying to upgrade their consciousness. Sastra is the sacred scriptures. So, like the Bhagavad Gita that we're studying, the Bhagavatam, it's another beautiful scripture. So these three things serves as checks and balances to ensure that we're staying on the course, to ensure that our vehicle is between those yellow lines and we're not swaying. And they're so incredibly important because in the absence of them, we tend to rely on our mind. And when we do that, we're so easily misled by illusion or personal speculation. And in the absence of cultivating the ability to surrender to something other than your own mind, without the proper knowledge, we will fall down. Right? We need this proper knowledge. We need the association of people that are uplifting us. And we need a guide. We need a guide, somebody that we trust, somebody who lives this, who not only knows this, but lives it and can see where we are and where we're not and help, guide us accordingly. I talked a lot about my bad relationships that I've had, but I was in one bad relationship that was particularly bad. And everybody was telling me, this is not good for you. My friends, my family, they were like, you're not yourself anymore. Like everybody knew it, but me. Everybody could see it. My mom's on this call. She's probably like shaking her head right now. And at the time, I didn't have a super strong spiritual relationship. I didn't have this knowledge. And I had been in relationships with people in authority positions that had kind of let me down, right? So I wasn't really ready to surrender to anybody. I was like, and this is also something that's a trap that you can fall susceptible to. If you're a person that is pretty self-reliant and pretty intelligent, is used to figuring things out, you start to thinking you're a little bit smarter than you are, right? You think, oh, that'll never happen to me. I know how to handle this. I can get myself. I'm in a good place. Nobody really understands, right? It's like you really justify things because you're used to like having all the answers and being able to figure it out, right? And I certainly didn't have saintly association. I had a couple good friends, but I wasn't listening to them. So I was really kind of left to my own devices, my own mind, my own intelligence, which was obviously corrupt, right? Because I was so focused on being with this guy that lust was just like penetrating every facet of my defense system. When we say lust, again, it's really something that this overpowering desire for something that could be very destructive. That's the way we're talking about it in this context, in this verse. So I had this need to fill this God-shaped hole in my heart. And I was transforming that love for God into lust for something that I thought would make me happy. My mind was corrupt. It was a traitor to me for all intents and purposes, right? And people whose minds have been corrupted with lust, again, that's just all that we see. And I was talking to I have a good friend who just went through the AA program years ago and has a lot of wisdom for it. And he was telling me this quote that they use a lot because AA is a very God-centered program. And a lot of people come to it. They're not so much looking for a relationship with God. They're really just looking to stop drinking. But in AA, they have this saying that for every person that God drives out of AA, whiskey will drive someone back in, right? So it's like we can think, that these other things will make us happy. If it's substances, maybe it's substances, maybe it's a relationship, maybe it's, a job, maybe it's a house. We could think that all these things are going to make us happy. But ultimately, we'll realize that the full satisfaction of the soul needs God alone, right? And these other things may provide some temporary pleasure, some temporary distraction, but ultimately, if they're not rightly situated, to support relationship with God, then we're gonna be coming back looking for something else, right? Because that's ultimately what our soul is craving for. Everybody needs bhakti, this love and devotion for God, but aren't always in a place where we can be receptive. And that's where I was at this time. Wasn't really even able to be receptive enough to get myself out of that relationship just to improve my material life. It just wasn't there. So that's one way, individual boundaries. And that's incredibly important. And then if we have collective boundaries, it's also good to have input. How can we keep ourselves safe while still honoring our individuality and self-expression in a way that doesn't limit our growth? Because if we're not able to be in a situation where we can express our dharma, we see that in some capacity, in some way. We also see in the Gita where that is a struggle for us psychologically. So again, just being able to identify where different boundaries exist within our families, within our cultures, and trying to assimilate that in a way that is checking all the boxes, for yourself, keeping yourself safe, enabling you to express yourself in a way that is conducive to your nature. And that's a personal responsibility for us all. So why do we need boundaries? And this is also said in the verse. We need boundaries because lust is a destroyer of knowledge and self-realization, right? Knowledge of the self, that the spirit soul is not the body. That's the knowledge we're talking about. Because if we get over-identified with matter, we forget who we are entirely. And we're just chasing this mirage in the desert, right? The living entities are part and parcel of the Lord and are simply meant to serve the Lord. That's our rightful position. Illusion makes us think that we're the center and that everybody's meant to serve us. And soon enough, the universe will throw us enough bricks that we'll learn that that's not the case. Lust is a perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living being. So this lust that we all have, it's a perverted reflection. We should know it for what it is and what it isn't, so that we can deal with it in a constructive way. And that's what the Gita is teaching us right now. And if we don't have knowledge of God consciousness, the natural love of God can deteriorate into lust. That's what happened to me in my relationship in my unhealthy relationship. And when this happens, it's difficult to return to our original condition. However, the process of God consciousness, God realization is so powerful that even a brand new person, even someone who's just starting on a spiritual path, can become a lover of God by following regulative principles, by regulating their senses, by surrendering to something bigger than themselves. Guru, sadhu, sastra, even just pick one, start there. One can begin regulating senses at any time, practicing devotional service, and turn the lust into love of God. And that's what we're trying to do here. So the destroyer of realization, it says in this verse that it destroys knowledge and realization. That means that we start believing that this time around it will be different. Have we ever fallen into that trap? In again, relationships are such a great example, but anything really, you think, okay, this time around, I'm going to do this. I know it's going to be different. And then for whatever reason, it's not. And we're like, why isn't this different? Am I just a person who has really bad luck? Am I just a person who attracts really bad partners? How do I keep ending up in the same situation over and over and over again? Right? Because when the force of lust affects us, we reject our own experiences. And this lust can be emotional too. It can be like to fulfill some kind of emotional need in us. We are thinking that this certain dynamic is going to satisfy that, and that's maybe a pretty unhealthy dynamic, or this set of choices, is going to satisfy that. And it doesn't. And without the boundaries, we end up repeating the same experience again and again and again, and never really learning from it. And experience is the best teacher. Right? To say, like, the wisest will learn from other people's experiences. The less wise need their own experiences. That's oftentimes me. The super foolish don't even learn from their own experiences. Also oftentimes me, right? So where are we in this? Where are we in? Are we able to look at other people's mistakes and not judge them, but know, oh, wow, yeah, I can see how they got into that. I'm going to try to keep myself from going down that route, Or have you ever shared your own mistakes with somebody just for the purpose? This is actually what I do on this program all the time, just for the purposes of other people learning from it and seeing, it's easy to see where other people went wrong. Sometimes much easier than to see where you yourself went wrong, right? Because we have that inherent bias and resistance to kind of owning that or admitting these faults about ourselves. But yeah, if we could learn from other people's experiences, or if we could use our experiences for other people to learn from, what a stronger, society we could be, how much we could really lift each other up. But if you're not there, it's okay, because you'll learn. The universe will give you enough experiences over and over again that you'll learn, I don't think my boundaries were quite right there. And that's just growth. That's pretty normal, right? To have an experience and say, ooh, I did not end up right where I did not end up in a place that feels good or elevates me. Let me reevaluate that and let me make a change in the way that I conduct myself or my boundaries for this certain situation. And that's an ever evolving process. And that's okay if that's what you're doing. What we don't want to get stuck into, again, is just blaming something else other than us, right? Or blaming the triggers instead of owning. Triggers, it's real. Triggers are triggers, but it takes someone to pull that trigger, and that's us. And we have to know that and identify with that and be real about what's needed to stay in a safe lane. And as we become more wise, we'll climb up, right? So as we become more wise, we'll be able to learn more from other people's experiences without having to go through so much headache and heartache. And we'll be able to kind of look around and see, the suffering of others and identify the causes and create boundaries in our lives to kind of separate ourselves from that. That's, the boundary for drinking in spiritual life. We see how destructive it is, that it's saying, I'm just going to stay away from that. Not that everybody needs to do that. Everybody needs to make a choice for them. But that's a choice I've made that I feel good about. So the greatest threat to individual freedom is actually the individual, right? We like to think, again, that it exists outside of us. If we talk about something like slavery, right, or bondage at a political collective level. This is much less than in the past, which is wonderful. But at an individual level, in the form of addiction, it's huge, right? We're all so bound. I remember when I first got into yoga culture, maybe 20 years ago now, the first book I read was a book called Yoga. And it was about this girl who was traveling through, I think it was Nepal, and she ended up in this jail. She was like unfairly put in this jail, I think because she was distributing spiritual books or something. And the book was all about how even though she was in this jail cell, she had so much more inner happiness and inner fulfillment than the prison guards. And so it went through both of their lives, kind of parallel. And we saw how much the guards were suffering and how she was in this jail cell, but she was completely free. And then throughout the book, she started teaching the guards yoga philosophy. And we saw them kind of evolve. And it was so beautiful. And it's such a testament to all of us. Again, that wherever you are, the biggest bondage, the biggest addiction, we're slaves to our own minds. And that's for us to see and for us to change, which is really kind of beautiful. But if we don't recognize and reinforce the boundaries needed to do this, then we'll just keep doing the same things over and over that we know are not good for us. Right? So now I'll share just these last practical tips for getting out of this. And then I want to hear from you guys about what you think, what you related to, maybe even what you struggle with and how you set up boundaries to protect yourself. Maybe we can have a little conversation around it. So when we talk, what can we do about all of this? We talk about controlling the senses from the start. Again, our senses are our first line of defense. Control them from the very beginning, meaning that we don't wait until temptation is too strong. We stop it early, right? Because of the three like protection lines of defense, the senses, the mind, the intelligence. The senses are the grossest and therefore the easiest to control. Right? So a practical tip is avoid situations that lead to uncontrolled desires. Right? Again, for example, if you struggle with overeating, don't keep junk food at home. If inappropriate social media content tempts you, set restrictions. If bad company leads you to unhealthy habits, choose better friends. Identify where there's this fork in the road and you're going the wrong direction, and come back to the fork and close it off. And in that, we regulate the mind and intelligence. The mind is restless and it's driven by emotions, but the intelligence is logical and can guide the mind. So we can use the intelligence to discipline our desires instead of being blindly controlled by them. And our spiritual practices help us with this so much. And this isn't like trying to endorse a spiritual culture. It's just saying, hey, I've done these things and they've helped tremendously in life. And if you're struggling in life, worth trying out and seeing if it works for you. Maybe it doesn't, and you decide, I don't want to do this anymore. But there's a reason that so many different traditions have incorporated spiritual practices in their programs or relationship with source or just relationship with higher being. It does bring peacefulness within us, within our minds, contentment. It brings about healthier relationships. It brings about gratitude and appreciation for yourself and others and your path. And just these simple practices, just daily meditation or prayer, reading scriptures, being more self-reflective, journaling, gratitude. These things will help us. We journal, we write down thoughts that helps prevent impulsive actions driven by lust, anger, or greed. Sometimes we don't even know really what's going on inside us until we sit down and we just start writing, just like free form. Just like if you're feeling really intense, like there's a lot going on inside you or you're just heavy emotionally, just sit down and just write and see where it goes. It can be such like a release for us. It can also lead to bigger, deeper realizations and gives us an opportunity to kind of step back and say, oh, wow, just to kind of zoom out of our own lives sometimes, our own emotions, our own like mind making, our own like meaning making machines of the mind, and to really kind of assess what's going on and maybe correct it. Then we can step back and say, okay, I think I need to make these changes going forward so that I'm in a better place, right? And train ourselves to see lust and greed not as enjoyment, not as like stimulating, but as distractions. And if our ultimate goal is connection with source, or even if your ultimate goal is peace of mind, things like lust and greed are not going to get you there. They're only going to be distractions. And the Gita warns us that uncontrolled material desires lead to dissatisfaction. Many people will chase wealth, status, or physical pleasure, but remain empty inside. That is epidemic. We see that everywhere. Some of the most beautiful people in the world are the most miserable. The richest are struggling the most, right? So we want to shift our focus from the short-term pleasures to long-term fulfillment, like personal growth, family, spiritual life, practice moderation, whether in eating, entertainment, or relationships, so that desires don't just control you. So when we talk about like social media and entertainment, instead of like, the uncontrolled approach would be like watching anything impulsively, which leads to distractions. The practical Gita-based approach would be like setting boundaries, right? Consume content that uplifts the mind. We just put a little bit of regulation in our lives. We don't have to just completely, go cold turkey to everything, but just regulate a little bit. In relationships, instead of letting emotions or physical desires lead interactions, approach relationships with a higher level of respect, control, emotional control, dharmic intentions. Right? Eating and health. Instead of overeating or consuming unhealthy food impulsively, eat mindfully. Control cravings with discipline. And even in our work and our success, instead of chasing money or status endlessly without peace, work with dedication, but maintain inner detachment. And this verse, just in conclusion here, before I want to open it up to discussion with you guys, it's about self-mastery, right? Not suppression, but regulation of desires. That's where we're getting. It's about progress, not perfection. And if we control the senses early, that first line of defense, and we use our intelligence and see beyond temporary pleasures, we can achieve this inner strength and clarity, and ultimately this spiritual progress that we're all here for. So that's 341, largely about regulation and boundaries. And what I really wanted to do here was kind of try to start to challenge us, all of us collectively, to see where these boundaries pop up in our lives and be more deliberate and intentional about them, whether they're collective or individual. Be more deliberate and intentional about what they are, why they're there. And in that, maybe we can develop a stronger conviction for them so that we can live the Gita in a more honest and committed way. So with that, I would love to hear from some of you. Mariah, I was actually thinking, I would love at the end of each class for you to kind of do the service of maybe leading with some reflections. So you tend to do that, and they're always so beautiful, and maybe it could be kind of a way to kick some things around here.
Thank you for that. All my reflections just come from things I've heard. So, some of them are my own personal experience, but honestly, boundaries is a hard one for me, and something that I'm learning more within this past year, honestly. And coming back into Krishna consciousness is really like what is helping me get clearer on my boundaries and boundaries I need to have for myself. One of the biggest ones that came up within the past year or two was just like who I allow myself to associate with. Krishna just started kind of like taking away certain friendships. Like as I became more Krishna conscious, I just started to see like how much I don't connect with certain people. Like I was just connecting just out of like old familiar patterns, and just friendships that were from when I was like a teenager, which they weren't bad or anything, but as we grew older, it's just like time was telling us we were growing apart, but we were trying to like keep the friendships. And as I started to get more strict on like, okay, absolutely no like partying, no doing this kind of stuff, friendships naturally just broke away. And it was painful, but at the same time, I could see that Krishna was like, you need to associate with devotees, you know? And so that was the boundary I created for myself, was like, okay, I'm going to just go and make new friends, but they're going to be only devotee friends, you know? Or if I do make a new friend who isn't a devotee, I'm going to purposefully ask them to like come to the temple with me or kirtan center with me or something, because I don't want to have these like inauthentic relationships anymore. And actually, that's how, Kimberly ended up coming to Kirtan Center with me, because she kept being like, I want to be your friend. I want to be your friend. Like, I want to get to know you. And I'm like, I don't know. Like I'm like trying to like get new friendships, but I just didn't want to just be friends with anybody off of anything.
And can I tell everybody, Kimberly is your child's father's girlfriend,
Yes.
right? So
Yes.
it's very sweet to see you guys together and interacting so like lovingly.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's been really positive, but I couldn't have done it if it wasn't like, for me, holding that boundary of, hey, yeah, I'll be your friend, but you're going to come into my world and I'm going to show you my actual authentic self that I want to be, which is a devotee. And so I was like, do you want to come to the temple with me? And I told her, I was like, me and Luna go and we feed the cows, and I think your daughter would be into it. And there's peacocks and tons of stuff to do outside. She goes, yeah, I'd love to. And then she like asked me to put her in a sari, and like I took her to the temple and I showed her chanting, and honestly, she's reading the Gita now, and she like asks to come to Kirtan Center, and her daughter like chants Hare Krishna. So it's like, it's amazing when you actually be your authentic self, the type of people that he'll just arrange for these people to come into your life. So, that was just like one boundary I really started to create for myself within the past year or two, was just like, okay, because I was always very shy and like afraid to like show people like, oh, I come from this Hare Krishna temple, because my whole life I was kind of ridiculed for it. So I always just shied away and like didn't make a lot of friends, or if I did make friends, it was like just very minimal. So I kept the same, like I had like the same three friends for like my entire life until the past like 2 years. So, it's been like a huge change. And yeah, I was just like, I'm going to show who I really am. I'm going to show this authentic self of who I want to be, of like being a devotee. And so that was just like one boundary. And then another one that I'm kind of creating for myself this year is just trying to not get caught up in the gossip. Like at work, I work personally with like one of my coworkers, and there tends to just be like just a lot of complaining about certain things, which in one sense we all need to let it out, but in another sense I'm just kind of like, I get so caught up in it. Like I get caught up in like validating and agreeing and like just blending in. So this year I've been like actively trying to not engage in the conversation or like redirect it. So that's like a new boundary I'm trying to start, because I was just getting caught up in like complaining or gossiping, and I just didn't like the way it was like affecting me. So that's a new boundary I'm trying to create for myself. But yeah.
Wow, those are beautiful. Yeah, those are great. So uplifting association or like-minded association, which is so important because who we hang out with really is kind of who we become, whether we know it or not. So that's really important.
Yeah.
And the gossip. Yeah, same principle there too. It's like if we're constantly hearing negative and judgmental things, and then it starts to become our own inner narrative. So we have to protect our minds, our consciousness against that, so that we can again stay centered on between the yellow lines. So good.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Beautiful. And what a difference it makes with God-centered relationships, right? Keeps us from getting kind of entangled in each other's egos, when it's a God-centered relationship. That
Yeah.
makes such a difference. Thank you. Does anybody else want to share? Any way that, oh, yes. Kalpana, please share with us. Am I saying your name right?
Yeah,
Kalpana?
yeah,
Okay,
Kalpana.
great.
I would say that I whatever Mariah said, I can reflect that to everything that she said, like setting boundaries with who I'm talking to, who I don't want to talk to. But the only thing is that she is shy and I was not. I'm not shy, and I can make friends, or I can talk to anybody. I'm flying or walking or going to the park. But now, since last few years, I have limited who I talk to, because if you want to go on this path, this is so important that you have to associate only with devotees. That one thing. And the second thing also about gossiping, sometimes we have to, yeah, agree, validate when somebody's talking, and we don't want to hear what all they are talking about somebody or something, or even politics. But you have to just agree and all that until the conversation is over, and then you're like, okay, now I want to do my japa.
Yeah, so true. And this thing with association, there's two kinds of association. We can take association, and that's when we're kind of absorbing from other people around us. We're with like-minded people, and we kind of are encouraging and uplifting each other. Or we could give association. And if
Yeah.
we're giving association, yeah, that requires pretty tall emotional boundaries, because we want to be able to, maybe our family, or maybe some friends, old friends that we have that that aren't totally out of our lives, but at the same time, there's things that we don't want to absorb, in our consciousness. So we have to kind of create, yeah, that barrier. But it doesn't, we may, to be in their presence, or we may even still want to have a relationship with them, but we have to understand the difference between the taking and the giving association, so that it doesn't impede, where we are or where we're going, like you said. Yeah. And that could be so hard, family is the hardest thing with that, because as soon as we're with our family, we start to go back to like our old selves, our old triggers, our old, like we turn into like a 10-year-old kid again. And so we have to, that's like the ultimate test of how much you've grown, is when you can get back into some of those dynamics, and you can have those boundaries, those barriers that, okay, I'm not going to go here. I'm not going to let my mind go there. I'm not going to let myself get triggered by this. I'm going to stay straight. It's a good test for us. And in that, maybe we can uplift our families as we can work on ourselves, and we could give that healthy association.
I'd
And
like
I
to add.
appreciate. Oh,
No, please continue.
Yeah, please share. Kalpana.
Um,
I appreciate so much that you sharing all your personal experiences and all these things, because that, I think, will help the youth so much. I have a 22-year-old daughter, and she listens to you so carefully. And I mean, she's very introvert, but whenever she goes out or seeing somebody or dating somebody, I mean, she would know, I would assume that, okay, I have heard so many. Because I, being a mother, I am saying things, do this, don't do this, or, there, expect this, or, but then coming from somebody else like you, and again, connecting it with Gita, it is so strong for them to understand, and it is so helpful. So I want to appreciate that.
It's Krishna's mercy, for sure, that I'm even here today with all of you guys. So it's Krishna's mercy that you're here. So it's wonderful that we could share that together. Thank you. Lisa, I feel like were you was that you who was talking, Lisa?
I was going to say something, but I first of all, I would like to also join in the appreciation of you being willing to be vulnerable and to share from your life. It does make a difference. It goes from being a theoretical understanding of bhakti and devotion to the actual practice of it in your everyday life, which is always a light on the path. So I want to say that. And because I keep potato chips out of my house, I, for the same reason, it's like keep things out, at least close the gate on potato chips. I was thinking about something that was shared with me many years ago about the difference between sin management and having a true connection with the divine, which is what I'm experiencing today when you're sharing. The word was sin management instead of managing sin. You know what I mean? Understanding that the truth connection is what allows me to make better choices based
Mm.
on my understanding because my thoughts are then I can see them reflected in my life. And so when I was thinking about your
Right. Just
comment,
because just because you're a little bit fuzzy, I want to just repeat this because it's so powerful. You said sin management, which is
mhm,
more about understanding the essence of why you're doing what you're doing and then making choices that can better align with that than letting sin manage your life.
mhm,
Right. Right. That's what you said?
yes, yes, that's the essence of it because then I get a chance to observe my behavior which are reflections of my true thinking. So if I find myself surrounded by people who are complaining or gossiping, it gives me an opportunity. I may not be complaining or gossiping in that scenario, but where am I being? Because it's in my field of awareness. And so then am I a complainer? Gets to be a valid spiritual inquiry where I get to look and say, hey, let me look around through the domains of my life and see where I'm either gossiping or complaining or I'm being lustful, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then it becomes, as you say, an opportunity to associate with others, not just in the physical, but also in my mental, so that I'm keeping healthy spiritual hygiene. So
Yeah.
thanks for today.
Yeah, it's beautiful when you talk about sin management instead of letting sin manage your life. And what I was thinking about when you were saying that is we could have sin managing our life, just kind of we just follow our desires and our temporary pleasures. Or we could have such strict boundaries that we're so focused on the external and the boundaries, and we're not really even understanding the purpose of the boundaries. So we're maybe becoming a little bit resentful, or we're kind of half-heartedly following them. But where we kind of want to be in the middle here is really, like you said, being the essence seekers, connecting with that essence, why we're doing what we're doing, what our ultimate goal is, whether again that's connection with source, peace of mind, a healthy relationship, whatever, and creating boundaries around that to assist us in our growth and development towards that. And that's a much more like sustainable and connected place to be. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
And thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Anybody else like to share? Okay. Well, thank you all for coming. Thanks for our newcomers. It was so nice to have you, to get to talk with you a little bit. And we'll be back here on Monday to continue through. Maybe we'll even finish chapter 3. So have a good weekend.